Hey folks, Nathan here. We are continuing this time with our look at the Tiny Epic games in our content overview videos. This time we're taking a look at Tiny Epic Quest. Now for those who are curious, we've already taken a look at Tiny Epic Dungeons. We did that kind of out of order because that was the first video in this series that I did, and that sparked interest in doing all of the other ones. We have taken a look at Tiny Epic Kingdoms, 1st edition, 2nd edition, and all expansions, along with Ultra Tiny Epic Kingdoms. We looked at Tiny Epic Defenders, 1st edition, 2nd edition, and its expansion. Tiny Epic Galaxies, the first printing, later printings, the various expansions, and the kid version, and all that kind of stuff. And we've taken a look at Tiny Epic Western. We will find that this is the game that actually introduced the item meeples, but we've already seen them because the Tiny Epic Defenders 2nd edition and Dark War crowdfunded after this one. But of course, we looked at them at the same time we looked at Tiny Epic Defenders 1st edition. So we've already seen item meeples, but just know this is where those began. And they really didn't last all that long. We'll see that pretty soon they will fade from the Tiny Epic line, not to be seen again thus far. We will, of course, be looking here at the base game, along with its deluxe version content, and we'll be looking at the eRaptor storage solution, along with the playmat that is underneath. To start us out, let's note that this was crowdfunded back in 2016 with a goal of $15,000. They raised $589,816, so well beyond what they had hoped for. Then, of course, there are the different pledge levels to address. We had a retail version at $20. That would leave out the deluxe content that we will see. The deluxe version was $24, or 2 for $46, or 10 for $200. And there was an honorary producer pledge for $250, or you could have gone the entire opposite direction with just the premium print and play for $8. Let's set this all aside first and very quickly look at the mat that's underneath everything, though we will come back to it later. So here's what's going to be our background. We're going to see this kind of zoomed in as we look at the components and all, but this is the Tiny Epic Quest official play mat. It is the only map. There aren't player mats or anything. It's just this one, and we will eventually see this with everything actually laid out on it a little while later. But for now, let's just talk about what is actually on the mat so you have a sense of what might be in play here, and then we'll look at the components and come back to it filled out later on. So you have spaces for all of your map cards that create your map. And there are specific positions when you lay it out where the castles, sort of the starting points, the home bases for each faction needs to be. They actually have those marked with the artwork of the castles. You have the logo and the Gamelin logo off to that corner there. Over in this corner here, you have a tracker to help you deal with scoring at the end of the game. We'll talk more about that when we talk about the scorecard in a bit. You have a place to put goblin tokens. You have a place to put your round tracker and your magic tracker. They call it the round card and magic card, but I tend to think of them as trackers, because that's what you're doing. I would note one thing that's kind of cool on the magic card is that you don't actually start at the first level of the magic card. As we will see, it actually starts with level 1, and you have to get to level 1. You start at 0, which is basically off the card. They have a nice little spot there where you can stick your token when you're not on the card. A place for your treasure items over here, either loose or on a special little cardboard holder for them. I definitely recommend the holder, as we will see. A place for your quest deck and quest cards. Up here, this is where the movement cards are going to go as they are being chosen through action selection from turn to turn. There's also a push your luck dice mechanic, as we will see in the night phase, and they have managed to put a little key to all the different die faces or dice faces there on the actual mat with a little description beside it of what it does. And they're actually in the order that you would resolve them, sort of. You will always resolve these first, this second, this third, but those other ones you would resolve all at once, essentially. It's just, it doesn't matter what order those last 3 go in, you just have to do it after the other 3. But the other 3 do have a prescribed order. Again, as we will see. But a nice mat here, very good at organizing what you need to play, but nothing for the actual players' components other than their meeples. That's all going to be off on the player's own little cards. So this here is our core box. It says Tiny Epic Quest, a game of adventures, plural, by Scott Alms, Gamelin Games. You've got Gamelin, 1 to 4 players, 60 minutes, ages 14 plus, Tiny Epic Quest. You got your one vertical side here, Tiny Epic Quest, the imagery there, and then the company logo. Then you got your horizontal side with just the logo on it here. So just kind of taking it around. There you go. And then the back is of course going to lay out what this is all about with a component list, card sleeve information, the UPC and QR code, company logo, credits, legalese and all, the things that make Tiny and Epic a medium entry, high strategy, low downtime, short play time, high replayability, and small box, this one says. The fact that it features 12 equipable meeples and 24 items. Item meeples! And then you have your stats again, as we saw on the side, along with the logo, and then the description. In Tiny Epic Quest, you will embark on a grand adventure of courage and glory. A once powerful world has been torn asunder by an army of goblins invading from beneath the land's crust. It's up to the players to prove their valor through slaying goblins, learning ancient spells, completing quests, and acquiring powerful items that equip right to your meeples. Item meeples! TM. Can you move your heroes to complete quests before your opponents do? Will the horse get you there fast enough? Or will you need to take the griffin? Will you press on to complete one more goal? Or should you rest and assure a better tomorrow? And that really gets at kind of the general gist of what we're going to see here. There's sort of an action selection thing going on, so you can achieve certain objectives to score points towards the end of the game, and there is a press your luck mechanism to go with it. It's a weird game to try to categorize, but that kind of gives you a sense of what all is going to come into play here, as we'll see as we look at the components. As to the box itself, there was a $3,000 stretch goal to increase the box thickness to 2 millimeters. The matte finish and spot UV were stretch goals at $45,000, as was having interior printing, though it's essentially the same image, just a little zoomed out here. I would note that at least on my printing, we have Tiny Epic Western on one side, the scoring information of how the game will be scored at the end of the game on one side, Tiny Epic Galaxy's advertisement, then the other side is again the scoring information as well. So works kind of like a dice tray if you want to use it that way, but again, just interior art as a stretch goal. Of more use is the interior of the top, which can also be used as a dice tray and has some functionality as a dice tray. It says Dice Grotto, and it shows you the different dice symbols and the order in which they resolve and a little bit of sort of a key of what they do, at least in terms of what they're called underneath, which sort of describes their purpose, as we'll see. Obviously, you have your rule book for the game here, in this case, just called Rule Book. Got all your information about all the different modes. Yes, this game can be played solo. The way that solo mode works, basically, since the multiplayer mode is just to get more points than everyone else, in the solo mode, you essentially set yourself a target based on difficulty level of how many points you must get by the end of 5 rounds. The game is always played over 5 rounds, whether we're talking solo or otherwise. There is also a game variant we will see called Gloomfall that is built into the regular version of the game, whether it's retail or deluxe. The deluxe thing is separate from Gloomfall, although sometimes that gets confusing because it has its own logo and everything. So let's go ahead and talk about the large cards first. These are going to be your player cards. Every player needs one of these during the actual gameplay to keep track of their various stats. For each of them, you have a track along the top that is going to be where you're going to keep track of both your health and your power. There is a reminder here that your maximum power is going to be 6 plus 1 for each goblin you have slain. There's a reminder up here that if you ever become exhausted by hitting 0 health, hence the heart behind it, you wind up losing 1 level on the magic card. You have a reminder that your maximum power is 3 plus 1 per spell level on the magic card. Same thing as this. Neither of those, by the way, can exceed 10 because, of course, 10 is the maximum that's shown here. Then in between, you have a couple of reminders that during the night phase, you could spend 2 power to advance 1 torch or map symbol on one of the different temple cards that we will see, or that you could defend from 1 incoming damage symbol for 2 as well. We'll see exactly how that works when we see, in that case, how the dice rolls work. Underneath here, you'll notice that you've got these little symbols or these little images of some items. These are the legendary items. Everybody has the same 3, and you actually place those little plastic items that go onto your item meeples here on the track. And then when you complete one of these temples, you're going to move it to the next part. And then when you complete these, you move to the next part and you get to equip it. And it gives you some special ability. And then as you complete quests, you just stick them underneath your card down here. So just a functional setup here. It even gives you little spots to remind you of where your starting power and health are with those little silhouettes there. That's also where you would start again if you got exhausted, regardless of where your actual maximum is. There are little maximum trackers we will see that get placed above the actual card. As to the cards themselves, for what it's worth, the card quality increased to 310 GSM ivory core, got linen finish, and rounded corners at the $60,000 stretch goal. The backs of the player cards, they're not functional in any way, but they do have artwork here, and the cloaks match the color of that particular set of meeples, so that's kind of a nice touch. Now, since I've already mentioned the player cards, let's go ahead and look at the player components for each of the 4 possible players here, okay? So each one is going to have 3 item meeples. They're plastic instead of wood, and they have these holes in them so they can hold items, as we will see momentarily. Each of the players is going to get a health token that is exactly the same regardless of which player it is. Same thing with the power tokens. So the health tokens are just these little hearts. Power tokens, these little Triforce almost looking things, in my opinion, with a little lightning bolt on them. Then everybody gets a little spell token. Looks kind of like a butterfly here. That's the one token type that won't be on your player card. That'll actually be on the magic card, as we will see. Then you have little maximum health and power cardboard tokens. Those are all wood. Those basically sit above your player card to indicate your maximum and minimum without obscuring moving along the track for the actual tokens. And then you got your legendary items here again. The sword, the shield, and the staff. And just to show you what these look like when they're equipped on an item meeple, let's grab the sword and shield perhaps. We're going to steal them from green and give them to blue over here. It's easier to grab. They just pop into little holes. And there we are. We already saw this with Tiny Epic Defenders, 2nd edition, and Dark War. But again, this is where they began. And there are none that go on the backs. In this case, that was something that was introduced for Defenders later. These all just go on the front. You can only hold 2. For what it's worth, to have the health and power tokens be shaped into a heart and the little triangle thing instead of essentially just being cubes, that was a $75,000 stretch goal. The spell tokens were actually, along with some other stretch goals we'll see in just a moment, turning them into shapes instead of just cubes was the $100,000 stretch goal. The fact that they're all screen printed with actual imagery on them instead of just being a solid color, that was the $150,000 stretch goal. And having the little cardboard maximum health and power tokens, that was a $375,000 stretch goal. So this is an example of what your player card would look like. So you've got your tokens up here tracking your health and power, but your little cardboard ones up here indicating your maximum so you don't go beyond your maximum. And then over here, to begin the tracks at the start of the game, you've got your sword, shield, and staff ready to start moving as you complete those temples. And of course, an empty space underneath for the quests. Sticking with the large cards, we have ourselves 2 more large cards here and a couple of tokens to go with them. So this is your round card. This is where you're going to use the little round tracker to track the 5 rounds that you play through. You play through 5 rounds, a day phase and a night phase of each, and then that's it. And then it does have a score calculator over here for the end of the game. You're going to wind up scoring based on your spell level, as we will see over here, based on the number of quests you've completed, as we'll see when we look at quests, the number of goblins you defeated, which we'll see when we look at goblins here, and how many legendary items you've managed to unlock. So you would look here and see how many, and then that's how many points you would get for it. And notice green is super positive, then your white is fairly positive, yellow is kind of minimal, and then this sort of reddish orange is actually in the negative and takes away from your total. Then you have the magic card over here, and this is actually going to be something that differs whether you're playing solo or playing 2 to 4 players here. And you have this little magic token that's going to start at the beginning of the track as the game is played. As you are rolling dice during the night phase in particular, you're going to see this move along a track region to region to region. And that has an impact on what certain dice results mean, and it has an impact on what level of spells you can learn. Down here, This is your spell library. It starts at 1, so you'll be off the track to start with. And that's what those little butterfly-looking spell tokens were for. So for example, let's say you were in here. It has a 1 spell symbol. That means that you can learn a spell of 1 level higher than your current level. We'll learn how the spells actually work here in a bit, but say you're here on the little snake-looking symbol for level 1. If this is in this range that has a 1, if you had the ability, if you were out on the map to learn sort of the scorpion spell, the level 2, you could move it to level 2. And again, your spell level will play a role in winning the game. Though again, if you're ever exhausted, you lose 1 spell level. And exhaustion happens when your health hits 0, as I mentioned. This will constantly reset each round. So it's not that it just gets to a level and stays there. It will build over the course of each individual round, typically during the night phase, and impact what you're able to do as you're resolving things with your spell level acquisition. Again, having those screen printed, same stretch goals before, $150,000, and having the magic and round tokens be shapes rather than cubes. Those were at the same stretch goal level as the spell tokens, as I mentioned before, at $100,000. Sticking with large cards, now let's talk about locations. There are 17 of these in the game. So all these location cards that we're going to look at, this is how they would be laid out in the actual gameplay. It's always going to look basically like this. So what I'm doing here is I'm taking them away in the order you would set them up so you can sort of see the spaces now that you've seen what the map looks like as a whole. So you're first setting up this cross in the center. That's 5 map pieces, 1 in the center and then 1 on either side of it to create sort of a cross shape. And then you notice here, this is where the castle locations are that are going to be the starting points of all of your different faction meeples. And then these other ones just get set up basically 2 on either side to appear 2, and 2 to round out the locations. So the first 4 locations, the ones that actually have a set spot on the map, as we will see, those are going to be the ones that have your castles on them, which shows that each one also has a spell obelisk on the other side. So what are we looking at here? So each card is essentially divided, it almost looks like a cross, but it's not actually 4 separate locations. So when you move, you're moving from card to card. So one card has 2 regions on it. So you'll be moving from one set of 2 to another set of 2 and so on. And you'll have to pick which region you wind up going to because you aren't using both. You're going to pick one. So if I come to this card, I got to pick either the spell obelisk or the castle, one or the other. The horizontal line doesn't really differentiate anything other than just where you're going to put the meeple to get something to happen and some cool art to go with it. Typically, not all of them, but typically. And then the river going down the middle here, though, that does differentiate the 2 regions on a given card. And what they're going to have underneath is a little symbol to tell you how many meeples or from which players, that sort of thing, can be in that location, and then some effects. So for a castle, what happens is you can have any number of meeples on the castle from any number of players. When you either idle there, which means you've chosen not to move, or you move on to that spot, and we will see movement in a little bit when we look at movement cards, you gain 1 health or 1 power. This is also where you'll wind up back at, if it's your colored castle, if you become exhausted and all of your meeples have to come back there. Same thing at the end of the night phase, as we will see. A spell obelisk, on the other hand, if your meeple is here, then during the night phase, you are potentially able to learn a spell. Okay? 1 meeple from each player can be there at a time, hence the way that that symbol works here. But notice there's a specific symbol for the spell. And again, you can only learn a spell that is a number of levels or up to a number of levels above your current spell level based on where the magic track is. So you have to kind of play it safe here just a little bit, or maybe take a chance, because you could wind up in a situation where you're on a space where you could learn a spell, but because of where the magic track is or where your spell level is, you actually can't reach the spell that you're sitting there trying to learn. So you have to be kind of strategic with when you go to the spell obelisk to learn which spells. Thankfully, the levels are all laid out there on the magic card. It's not like the order of spells or their levels is ever a mystery. It's only a question of how many above your current level you can actually reach based on that magic track. So you notice you have 1 of these for each of the player colors to be their castles and a spell on all 4. Now the backs of the cards aren't just regular card backs, they are actual locations as well. These are the ones that are in gloom. The last possible stretch goal, which wasn't actually met but was instead gifted to all backers, was to have the, as I mentioned before, the Gloomfall game variant. It makes the game more difficult, but not through these specific cards here. Here we have the castles and the spell obelisks that still effectively work the same. Now remember, looking on the magic card, there are 10 spell levels. Well, 4 of them were on the opposite sides of those castle location cards. And remember also that when we looked at the player cards, there are 6 different temples to potentially go through to get rewards, including being able, if you do them in the right order, to get the unlocks 2 temples per item for those legendary items. Where do you find those? On these 6 cards. So each of these is going to have a temple on the right and a spell obelisk on the left. Spell obelisks work the same way as what we just saw. As to the temples, notice it's not actually 2 separate pieces here. It's all one piece for a temple. You can have 1 for you, 1 for another player, but that's it. So a maximum of 2 meeples on any temple at any given time from 2 different players. So you would start by placing your meeple here. During the night phase, when you're rolling dice, you're going to get map and torch icons, and you spin them essentially to move your way down the track. And once you've moved all 4 spaces, you have finished that temple. And typically you're getting some kind of reward either from a quest card or from moving along the track for your legendary items. The backs have the gloom version. Again, they're similar, but in this case, there is a difference. Notice here that the second level, once you get to the starting point, go 1 spend, 2 spend, and so on. The second level you can reach on a temple on the gloom side has 2 symbols rather than 1. So it's 1, 1, 2, 2 on the regular side, 1, 2, 2, 2 on the gloom side, just making the temples a little bit harder to get through. Then we have 7 cards here to round us out that have a goblin portal on one side and a mushroom grotto on the other side. So a mushroom grotto can have up to 1 meeple per player on it. As soon as you land on this from your movement, when you stop on it, you get whatever this ability is down here. In this case, conjure 2 magic. Advance the magic token forward 2 spaces on the magic track. So that's another way to move the magic token. And they all do have different abilities. So that's going to be something that happens, again, as soon as you land on it. So just like the castle, that's going to be something that happens during the day phase. We'll talk about the phases here in just a moment as we are heading our way towards eventually getting to the dice. Then the goblin portals are going to have a little goblin token up here that we will see in just a moment. And during the night phase, while you're here, you can use die results, plural or singular, to go after goblins and try to take them out. So let's see that in a moment, but let's very quickly look at the gloom side first. Here you go. So again, it's mushroom grottos on the right, goblin portals on the left. We will see a difference with how the goblins are set up as we look at the goblins. So let's start looking at them. So you've got yourself 16 of these goblin tokens. And you notice here there's a little like diamond up at the top and a bunch of little symbols. You can't really see them here. We'll see them when we look at the dice, but it's basically like a little like punch symbol. And there's a little red skull here along with the little green goblin face to match the surroundings. If you flip it over, you have yourself red border, red face, and a reminder of something we will see here in a second about movement. So what happens essentially is when it spawns, it'll sit on the card with the little diamond piece, the little golden piece, matched up with the little diamond spot on the card. Then during the night phase, you'll be able to attack goblins, as we will see, using die results. And essentially each damage you deal turns it clockwise, so that again, each time a little pointer and a little symbol is matched up with the little bit on the card, until eventually you hit the red skull. As soon as you hit that point, you immediately get to take the goblin, and again, dead goblins count towards your victory points. Note that the damage, though, doesn't stay. So if you were to not manage to get all the way around that track by dealing 5 damage during the night phase, then they will reset back to full health. But each goblin you collect also adds 1 to your maximum health threshold, which is nice. Again, there's a reminder of that on the player cards up in the corner. But you notice again, they have two different sides. Goblins will always spawn at the portal, at least in standard mode, not Gloomfall, but standard mode, on their green side. And you can pass by them as you're moving, no big deal, no issues at all. But if a goblin is not defeated during the night phase, and bear in mind there are 7 goblins out there because there are 7 goblin portals. If one is not defeated, it flips to its aggressive rather than passive side. On the aggressive side, to move past them requires spending 1 power. They're like attacking you and you're smacking them, and then they flip back to the green side. On the other hand, if they are defeated during the night phase, you've taken the token, and during the end of round, what's referred to as the resolution phase, then new green ones get put on the portal as long as there are still some left. So throughout the game, you'll tend to have a mixture of green and red, passive and aggressive, depending on which ones were defeated and where. And that can hamper your travel. I'd note, by the way, that when I mentioned them spawning in green, that is just for the regular mode, the regular side of the locations, with the little golden symbol here that matches the golden symbol on the green side of the goblin. If you're playing Gloomfall, they spawn aggressive, and it's a reminder here by having the little indicator there be red as well. I would also note, because I don't think I mentioned this before, you can only have one player have one meeple at any goblin portal, so that is an exclusive space. Now let's move on to the small cards. These here are your 5 movement cards. At the beginning of the day phase, for whatever player's turn that it is, that player is going to choose one of the available movement cards and just kind of push it up to indicate that's the one that is chosen. And then every single player gets to do whatever movement it shows on the card. We'll see those in a second because I want to show you that with it zoomed out a little bit here. And then once all the players have done so, you're going to flip it over to indicate through the art on the side that doesn't have information on it at the bottom that that one can no longer be chosen. And then the next player is going to choose the next movement card, and so on until 4 have been chosen. And it's 4 chosen regardless. If it's 2 players, you're each choosing 2. If it's 3 players, one of you is choosing 2, the other 2 are choosing 1. If it's 4 players, each of you is choosing 1. For solo, it is a little bit different in the sense that for solo, you're going to sort of draft it. You're going to shuffle them and draw 2, and then pick one of those. And you're going to draw another one, and now you got the one you didn't pick the first time, and a new one, you'll pick one of those. And you'll keep doing that until you've done 4 and 1 is left over. Your travel methods here for your movement cards are by foot, by ship, by griffin, by raft, and by horse, which are essentially one in any direction, moving along the outside of the map, diagonal, vertical on the river, and horizontal on the road. So let's see those in action on the map. Going back to the big map, though I think it's all kind of rearranged from the way we saw it earlier, just because I just kind of put them back randomly here, let's talk about what these movement cards actually do. So we're going to use a green meeple here, an item meeple, as our example, and we're going to start them in their castle here. Okay? Typically speaking, you are going to be on the bottom part of one half or the other. And when one of these movement cards is chosen as the one for that particular turn by the active first player, the movement options are going to be different. You can choose to idle, which means just stay in the same place. But if you want to move by ship, this is probably the more complex one of them. Basically, you can move around the coast cards here. So any card that borders the edge, essentially. So they could go from here to here, continue going around to here, and so on. Okay, going around the coast. But every one that they pass through going around the coast does count as having passed through it. But again, starting and ending points matter in different ways. But when it comes to the goblins, it's all about the ones you move through in between your start and your finish, not the actual start and finish. So that's moving by ship, coast to coast, as it says there. If you move by griffin, you're moving diagonally. And again, remember, this is from card to card. When you move from one card to another, you choose which side of the card to go on, but it does have to be movement from card to card. You can't move, say, from here to here. You can't move to the other side of the same card. That is, despite the fact that they are technically adjacent regions on the card, but each card is assumed to have two regions and you're always moving from card to card. If you go by raft, then it's vertical along the river. You notice every card in the center line splitting the two regions has a river flowing through it. So movement as much as you want in any vertical direction, that is going to be your river movement. So traveling by raft. And yes, I know it's a little weird where you got the raft and the ship, but the ship movement is the coasts, the raft is on the river. Then you have movement by horse along the road. So horizontal movement here. Notice that every card has a road going down the middle, separating the top art and the bottom art. So you would move along the road. Then you have by foot, and by foot lets you move in any direction. So it could be horizontal like a horse, it could be vertical like a raft, it could be diagonal like a griffin. But it's only one card in that direction. So I couldn't go all the way up here by foot. By foot just moves you to the next card, again, on either side. Then just real quick before we leave the movement cards entirely, yes, this is what the backs of all of them look like, the sides, once it's been used. Then each player also gets an adventure card, and this comes into play during the night phase. So during the day phase, you're choosing those 4 movement cards. Somebody picks one, everybody moves, somebody picks another, everybody moves, and so on. And that's all about sort of moving and strategically placing yourself. Though again, if you land on a castle, you can get yourself either the 1 health or the 1 power. If you land on a mushroom grotto, you can get its benefit immediately as well. You're still not doing anything with the spell obelisk, the goblin portals, or the temples yet. Those are all for the night phase, which is basically where these adventure cards come in. There's going to be dice rolling going on, and what you see on the adventure cards here is essentially a key and a reminder of what the different die faces mean and the order in which they are resolved. We'll actually take a look at the dice in just a moment so that we can see what exactly this is referring to. But basically there's a press your luck element to the night phase. Dice are rolled, you spend dice results, everybody gets to spend the dice results that come up, they're just rolled by a particular player, and then you do it again, and you do it again, passing it from player to player. But at any point you can be like, you know what, this is too dangerous for my blood, and flip your card over to the rest side, which specifically tells you what you will do. Now, in a practical sense, what does this mean? Well, if you are on a portal, and you have to return. That means that if you didn't defeat the goblin, well, you're out of luck. On the other hand, if you're on an obelisk and you are able to learn the spell that you're at based on where the magic track is, congratulations, as you leave to return to your castle, that's when you gain that spell and you move up on that tracker. And if you're on the last space of a temple track, then again, when you leave to return, you finish the temple, you get the benefit of it when it comes to the quest or when it comes to maybe those legendary items you're going after. But the ones that were already on a castle, the ones that were already sitting there in a mushroom grotto, they wouldn't come back normally when you rest. However, if your health ever hits 0 and you're exhausted, not only do you lose 1 on the spell track, you also have to take all of them home. And you do not get the benefits, even if you would have gained the spell, even if you would have gained that temple reward. Sorry, you were exhausted, you go home. Which is why you will want to rest before it gets too dangerous for you. Again, the push your luck mechanism that ties into these dice. So what's up with the dice? So you have 5 adventure dice. I would note that having them engraved with the symbols instead of just screen printed was a $125,000 stretch goal, and having this kind of swirled marble effect to the actual background, I guess you could call it, the surface there of each die, that was a stretch goal at $525,000. But there's 6 sides to these. Of course, they're D6s, but they are all 6 different sides. So whoever is the current first player is going to roll all 5 dice. And they're going to resolve in a certain order. The first thing that will resolve is this symbol. Okay, this is basically the symbol for taking damage to all the heroes. And just as it is a shared pool of dice, you roll the dice, everybody uses and shares the symbols on that roll, just like everybody shared the movement card that was chosen. Only in this case, things get kind of spread around in some cases. When it comes to taking damage, initially, this would represent taking 1 damage. But that's not because it's one symbol. The one symbol just corresponds to taking damage in general a certain number of times for each symbol. So here, let's say we're at sort of the base level of this particular round, and here we are with 2 of these symbols. What this means, though, is that the first player takes a damage, and then the second player takes a damage. If there was a third, the third player would take damage, or if it's a 2-player game, the first player would take damage again. The damage distribution is not that the person who rolled gets hit for the whole thing, or that everyone gets hit for the whole thing. It is distributed going around in a circle. And there is a danger to being in a situation where your magic level is too high. Yeah, it's great to have the magic level up there because it lets you learn spells better. Great, except notice, once you reach the point where you can move to 2 spell levels above where you are, all of a sudden, those take damage symbols each cost you 2 health, not 1. When you get to the end of the magic track, now they're hitting you for 3. And just so you know, this is the die effect that goes around in a circle. So if this thing is costing you 2 health instead of 1, it's 2 health to the first player, 2 health to the second player, 2 health to the third, and so on, depending on how many symbols there are that were rolled. It's not that if this is worth 2, one player takes 1 damage and the next player takes 1 damage. It's the symbol resolving for that player. Second, you're going to resolve any power symbols that were rolled. And it's the same way. They go around in a circle. But again, it is affected by where you are on the magic track. Initially, at least, in these first 2 levels here, it's different for solo, we'll look at that here in a second, but in these first 2 levels here, yeah, each symbol gives you 1 power. Awesome. When you get to the 3rd level here, though, on the magic track, they give you nothing. And the same thing in the 3rd level. So the farther along the magic track can get to help you learn spells, the less likely it is you're going to get power back. After you do your take damage and gain power results, now you need to resolve any conjure magic results. That is how the magic tracker is going to move, the magic token is going to move along the track. 1, 2, 3, 4 spaces, actually 3 movements because that's the starting point. 3 movements, you're still in the first zone. As soon as you get the next one, boom, you're in the next zone. 3, then 2, and then you're at the end of the track over there. And as it moves, I've already talked about what happens to the amount of damage that each of those take damage symbols deals, and how the gain power symbol means nothing for the last 2 of the 4 chunks of the magic track. Also notice here, once you're at the end of the track and that conjure magic can't keep it going, now each conjure magic symbol is also a hit for 1 health. That again is going to have to go around the circle. But those things that go around the circle, bear in mind they only impact those who are adventuring. As soon as you choose to rest, you are now immune to it because you're going to be sending your meeples home, essentially. Or if you're exhausted and then you're forced to rest, same kind of thing, except in that case, everybody has to go back to your castle. Which I don't think I mentioned before, but yes, getting exhausted means forced rest, everybody's back to the castle. So you're basically out of the loop of it going around. So that's where the press your luck comes in. You're passing the dice around after you're resolving everything. So the first player rolls, you resolve, second player rolls, resolve, and so on. But you're just going to keep rolling over and over again until everybody has rested. But resting at least protects you from any of the effects or benefits of that next roll. And again, it reminds you here that the first thing you do is take damage, second is gain power, third is conjure magic or take damage from the conjure magic symbol. Then you got these other 3 that can be done in any order. So what do? Well, a torch is going to be able to be used to move, as we saw, up a temple track that uses torches. Same thing with a scroll. It moves you up a temple track. Though remember, if you need to, you can forge ahead, as it's called, by spending 2 energy, 2 power, during the night phase to give yourself one of those results if necessary. Also, when you're being attacked, as we just saw with the take damage, I would remind you that you can defend against 1 symbol for 2 power, and that is 1 symbol worth. Alongside doing your advance in temple symbols here for the flame or the torch and the scroll, you also have the attack goblin symbol. For each one of these, you can rotate 1 goblin for 1 damage. Not all the ones you're facing, just 1. That brings us to the last type of regular cards, which are quest cards. And this is where we're going to finally see some more stretch goals involved and see all those cool little treasure items as we go. But those are for the other type of quest cards. We're going to start looking at the quest cards known as movement quests. So at any point, you're going to have these quest cards. They have just the game logo basically there on the back. And at any given point, there are 3 of these that are going to be in play at the start of a round. So basically at the start of the day phase. There will always be at least 1 movement and 1 treasure quest, though the other one can be whatever. In the case of movement quests, each one gives you a specific positioning or thing that you should do with your meeples to get yourself in a position to be able to take that quest as soon as you hit that position. So in this case, it's to complete this quest, have 1 hero on a temple, 1 on an obelisk, and 1 on a portal. You get to take the quest, and again, the number of quests completed will play a role in your score at the end of the game, and you get some benefit immediately. In this case, gain 3 health or 3 power. So these, none of which were stretch goals, are defend the inland region, guard the king's road, train the griffins, share ancient knowledge, light the cursed beacons, sweep out the temples, battle the twin krakens, study with foreign wizards, deliver the royal decrees, join the Bard's Guild, map the land, and attend an ally's coronation. I would note here that there is a first player token. This is going to be keeping track of who's the first player so that you know who it is that's going to do the first taking of a movement card at the beginning of the day phase, who's going to wind up rolling the dice first in the night phase, but also notice it has this Q on it, which is why I waited till now to show it to you. During the day phase, you will flip this over to this side when a quest is completed during the day phase. Because typically at the end of a round, you're going to wind up taking one of the 3 quests that are still out there, discarding it, and replacing it by scooting everything down a slot. But you're not going to discard if there's been one completed during the day phase and this has flipped over. You can complete any number of quests during the night phase, but during the day phase, this does come into play to help with balance. The first player token, by the way, is initially, at least if you follow the rules as written, given to the player who most recently finished a scavenger hunt, or whoever you decide. Now, before stretch goals, there's only 4 of the other type of quest card, which are the treasure quests. The goal here is to complete a temple while this quest card is still out there on offer in order to earn the treasure item that goes with it. Those little teeny tiny plastic little pieces to go on your item meeples. And each one just requires completing a specific temple. So you have Discover the Lost Treasure on all of them, but then when you look underneath, you'll see to complete this quest, complete the, and it'll tell you which temple, and it'll give you an image to go with it. So we have the Ice Temple, Desert Temple, Water Temple, and Forest Temple in this case. And then underneath it'll say equip, as your reward, equip, and name the actual item and its ability with an image of the little plastic piece, and then up at the top, artwork of that item here. So we have the ability to get the flute, the tome, the key, little lion head there, or the bow. But prior to stretch goals, that was it. Thanks to stretch goals, there are 8 more. The stretch goals here also just say Discover Lost Treasure as the name of the quest, but they are again sending you to the different temples here. You could go to the Water Temple to get the potion, the Shadow Temple to get the gemstone, the Fire Temple to get the lantern, the Ice Temple to get the boomerang, the Fire Temple also to get the bomb, the Forest Temple to get the fairy, the Shadow Temple to get the shovel, and the Desert Temple to get the cane. These new quests were all stretch goals that were unlocked at 13,000 likes on Facebook for the potion one. For the gemstone, it was 10,000 Twitter followers. For the lantern, it was $185,000, and they are all monetary from here on. For the boomerang, $210,000. For the bomb, $245,000. The fairy, $280,000. The shovel, $315,000. And the cane, $350,000. Now, about these individual items and those legendary items, if you look at the text for the legendary items for the sword or for the staff, it says the equipped hero, but it doesn't say that for equipped shield. Most of these, like the bomb, will also say the equipped hero, but there are some, like shield, that do not. Basically, the ones that don't say the equipped hero, and there aren't many of those are going to give you some ability anytime. That's really just the shield, the potion, and the gemstone. The shields let you spend 1 to defend instead of 2, using that ability on your card. The potion at the end of the day lets you immediately roll the dice and gain 1 health for each power symbol rolled, and the gemstone at any time lets you convert health into power, but not the other way around. Everything else is useful, but only by the hero with that item equipped. And again, they can only carry 2 items each, though they can sit items aside and get them later, or trade items, but that needs to be happening at your castle. Now, as these are super tiny and can be easy to lose, there's a little double-sided item rack that you can put them on during play. It's just a couple pieces of cardboard put together with a little piece of cardboard also connecting it underneath. I'll show you once I take these off of here in just a second. But this was the $450,000 stretch goal. So again, here it is empty. It's basically, again, just you got a little crossbar kind of thing here, and then just 2 pieces that connect together. Nothing fancy, but definitely better than letting them be loose on the table. We did look at the map a little bit earlier, but just to kind of show you what everything might look like around the beginning of, say, a 4-player game, here we are with our map laid out, all in their nice little spaces. We got the stuff that we need on the cards themselves, like the goblins and the actual item meeples and all. But then you have your cards set up for your trackers there, a place for the goblins, a place for the different quests, the movement cards, and then all your treasure items. Though I gotta be honest with you, when it comes to the treasure items up there in the corner, they are so tiny that I get really paranoid about losing them. So I would never, when actually playing, lay it out like this. Not a chance in hell. Instead, I would use the item rack and just sit the item rack over there in that spot, which is probably what it's meant to be because it does have that background that sort of looks like the wooden slats, but because they have all the different pieces on there, I have seen people lay them out like this, so I'm showing you how you could lay them out matching, but I wouldn't recommend it. I would just put them in the rack and put the rack in that spot, which again is probably what they intended. But it's a nice functional map, and then down there in the corner, you can track your score at the end. I do like using the map when playing. Now, one last thing as we look at the retail version before we look at the deluxe content here is that if you got the PNP version, or you just went to download the file that they made available, there was a $468,629 stretch goal, which was glorious victories. Again, kind of like achievements of just things to shoot for when you're playing the game, but it wasn't included in the physical copy. So that was all the content for the retail version of the game. Everybody gets it, including the different stretch goals. Though again, there weren't a ton of stretch goals this time around. If you got the deluxe version, which is available through either the original Kickstarter or directly through Gamelin Games, you get a special little mini expansion called Quest for the Golden Mushrooms. It's a mini expansion by Scott Alms, it says, lists the contents, and it says, "Save me," screams a mushroom from the clutches of a vile goblin. You race to the portal, sword drawn, in the hopes of vanquishing this foe and saving one of the mushroom folk. This deed will earn you a great reward for sure. Just watch your back, as your treacherous opponents may try to take credit for your hard-earned rescues. So you have 3 new location cards and 7 little mushroom folk little tokens or meeples here. You may recall that the map is pretty specific on what it's supposed to look like. Heck, we see the outline here on the board. So to use this expansion, you must replace 3 cards with these. The 3 that you remove, they're not random. It's the one that says advance one of your heroes 1 space on the temple track, conjure 2, advance the magic track forward 2 spaces on the magic track, and then the one that I just somehow skipped, deal 1 damage to a goblin that one of your heroes is attacking. So these 3 leave the game completely, and these new ones with the golden grottos interplay. But just like the cards they're replacing, they do have the goblin portals on the opposite side. And yes, if you flip them over, there is a gloom version of each. Having 3 map cards, by the way, instead of just 2, was the $400,000 stretch goal, the only stretch goal specific to the mini expansion for the deluxe version. So the way this works, basically, is that you will have a mushroom folk sitting, laying down, at each goblin location at the start of the game. There are 7 goblin locations, so 7 little mushroom folk meeples. If you defeat the goblin, so again, it goes all the way around to the skull, you take the token, you got the goblin token sitting on your side of the board or near your player stuff, so you can score some points at the end of the game with it. You also rescue the little mushroom folk, and they immediately move to your castle. If you want to, you could leave your castle and have them go with you, though they will not follow you into a temple. If you ever try to take one into a temple, then instead they are abandoned. They just stay in your starting place of your movement. Likewise, if you ever become exhausted and you have one with you, they just stay in that space where you got exhausted. Someone else can zoom by and pick them up later. If, while you're moving with them, you move through a golden grotto, but not into it, you don't stop there, you gain 1 power from moving through it. If you stop there, you don't get this, but you do have an option to return the mushroom folk and get some type of benefit for it, like advancing your spell token 1 space in the spell library in this case. But if you do that, they go to the returned pile. And at the same time you're placing new goblins during the resolution phase at the end of a round, the player with the fewest goblin tokens that have scored will wind up putting them on whatever goblin spaces without a mushroom folk that they want to put them in. So you can sort of strategically arrange them if they're falling a bit behind on the mushroom folk. I would also note that other players could steal the mushroom folk from you. If there's a mushroom folk at your castle, but there are more of another player's meeples at your castle than yours, they can leave and take the mushroom folk with them. Now there is an interesting risk-reward mechanism here though, because if you return that mushroom folk, you get yourself some ability. Advance your spell 1 in the spell library, or immediately gain a quest card from the quest row and its reward, which is pretty awesome, or take any goblin token in play and place it in your score pile. Don't replace until the end of the round. Those are pretty powerful stuff. But you're getting rid of the little guy. At the end of the game, every mushroom folk who is sitting in your castle scores you 2 points. So you have a little bit of a risk-reward thing here. Maybe near the end of the game you want to hoard them at your castle to get those points, because maybe there's less risk of them being stolen away. Whereas early, maybe you just want to get the rewards because somebody could go to your castle, have more meeples of theirs than yours there, and run away with your mushroom folk. Or maybe you'll get exhausted and wind up abandoning them. Or you want that particular meeple to go to a temple and have to abandon them. So there's a bit of a risk-reward aspect to it, but just adds another dynamic and another scoring condition to the game. And again, one last time before looking at solo, the scoring conditions come down to your spell level, your number of quests completed, your number of goblins defeated, the tokens that you have, the number of legendary items that you have unlocked, and if you're playing with Quest for the Golden Mushrooms, also the number of mushroom folk who are on your castle at the end of the game. For what it's worth, there is a tiebreaker, just in case you do wind up with a tie score. If the most victory points in general doesn't give you a clear winner, then you check for the most quests completed, then the most goblins defeated, then the highest spell level, then the most items, including treasure items and legendary items, and if a tie remains, players share the victory. Now lastly, let's talk solo mode. That is the way a lot of folks like to play tiny epic games. One big difference we're going to see is that the magic track is different because we're flipping it to the solo side here. So let's talk about the differences in general. So during the day phase, as I mentioned with those movement cards, since there's only one player, you're going to draw 2, pick 1, keep 1. Do the one you picked. then draw a new card. And now you have 2 to pick from again. Pick one, keep one. Same thing over and over again until you've done 4 of them and 1 is unused. That one that's unused will not be used that round because it's still just 4 movement cards. That's really the only big change in the day phase. During the night phase, obviously, you're the only one rolling dice. But after each round of rolling all 5 dice and resolving what's going on, you do get that choice to rest or not, assuming you weren't exhausted and forced to rest. But what you'll find is that as the magic track progresses, the symbols are different here. So in this first zone, can't learn any new spells, but the very first of these take damage icons that gets revealed, you don't actually take any damage. The second one and onward gives you that 1 health loss as normal. Notice here, the next phase, where you get 1 possible increase of spell level, you have quite a few different symbols up here. Your first take damage symbol gives you -1 health. Your second is ignored. Your third goes back to -1 health, and so on. I don't know if you can see it there, but it says third with the little ellipsis by it to indicate third and beyond. Your first power symbol, the little gain power symbol, is ignored, but then your second gives you a power, and onward after that. At the 3rd level of the magic track, that's going to give you the ability to go up 2 spaces in spell level potentially. Each of the take damage symbols gives you -1 health, and the gain power symbols are completely ignored. Then, when you hit the end of the track, that last space there, you're still getting hit for 1 for any more conjure magic symbols. You're still having to ignore any gain power symbols. So that's essentially the same as the multiplayer game. But here, those take damage symbols are worth -2 instead of -3 as it is in the multiplayer game. So it is at least adjusting that for the fact that it's just one person rolling dice. So if you got a bunch of take damage symbols to go around in a circle, they're just hitting you over and over again, and so on. Lastly, during the night phase, you are going to discard the right-hand quest card of the 3, shift them over, and refill to 3. And that is regardless of whether you completed any quests in the day phase, whereas, of course, during the multiplayer game, remember, that's what this was for, to stop you from doing that. And when you flip over all of those goblin tokens from the passive side to the aggressive side that are left standing, you actually only do it for 3 of them instead of all of them, and you get to pick which 3. Otherwise, it plays effectively the same. Although, of course, with the quest for the golden mushrooms, there's nobody to steal the mushroom folk away, so you might have different considerations as you're choosing where to go with them. But the whole point is to build up your point total, and depending on your difficulty level, you either met the goal or you didn't. So you either won or you lost. I do think that is at least an interesting way to sort of create a win-loss condition rather than it just being beat your own score. But it's pretty close to just beat your own score. Which is why, as much as I loved this game when it came out, and it's still a Tiny Epic game that I enjoy, it's no longer among my favorite Tiny Epic games because there are so many others in the series that stand out more so, at least for solo play in particular, than this one does. I'm okay with games where the goal is to score points, but for solo, I really want something more, and this only barely reaches beyond that with setting your own score goal in the first place. Well, this is the Tiny Epic Quest official eRaptor storage box. It is effectively the same size as what we saw with both for Kingdoms, both for Galaxies, both for Defenders, the one for Western. We're not going to see bigger ones for a little while yet, though of course we've already looked at Tiny Epic Dungeons, which means we have seen one of the larger boxes already. So let's take a look here. We've got ourselves, again, one of those nice acrylic covers with the artwork on it. There's a place for your rulebook, and then everything else is sorted out on the inside with plenty of room for sleeved cards, although I do not sleeve my Tiny Epic games, typically barring Dungeons there. So first we have ourselves a tray here that has our Goblin tokens, our first player token, and then our Magic and Round tokens. Underneath that, here we have our different adventure dice over here. And then these are our little treasure items, not the legendary items, just the treasure items, because the legendary items are per player. And then we have our golden mushroom tokens for the golden mushrooms mini expansion. Above those, so to speak, next to them, we have ourselves all of the regular sized cards and then the item rack taken apart. And these do all have art and such going around them of different types, as you see. Then each player has themselves their own little tray here that's going to have their 3 item meeples. It's going to have their spell token, their maximum health and power tokens, their actual power token to mark it, their health token to mark that, and then their 3 legendary items. So there's one for each of them. And then there's one big tray for all of the large cards. Underneath, we have the cool artwork there with the Gamelin logo and kind of the artwork that sort of fits the kingdom here. And then on the front, as is typically the case, we see the logo. And the same thing on the left-hand side, if you're following the instructions, of course. Then the other sides are just art, and of course the bottom is just blank black. But again, a nice storage solution. I would always caution the same things. This is basically for storage and organization in one place. I would not use them to travel. The lids will pop off, but if you're going to be playing in one place primarily, they're a nice solution to fit everything well. And as we get further along in the Tiny Epic line and the games have more and more stuff to try to cram in, these manage to get everything organized without feeling cramped or like you're going to damage components. So there you have it, folks. Tiny Epic Quest. All the content of the retail game, the deluxe version of the game, a look at the playmat, and a look at the official storage solution. At this point, they had crowdfunded Tiny Epic Kingdoms 1st Edition, Tiny Epic Defenders 1st Edition, Tiny Epic Galaxies, Tiny Epic Kingdoms 2nd Edition with Heroes Call, Tiny Epic Western, Ultra Tiny Epic Kingdoms, and Tiny Epic Galaxies Beyond the Black. Then came Quest. So we're pretty deep into the run of Tiny Epic games at this point. It was shortly after this one that they crowdfunded Tiny Epic Defenders 2nd Edition with the Dark War that also included item meeples. We will see 2 more Tiny Epic games with item meeples, Tiny Epic Zombies and Tiny Epic Mechs, which, interestingly enough, are the next 2 for us to look at. So join me next time as we take a look at a fan-favorite Tiny Epic game, which still doesn't have any expansions, Tiny Epic Zombies.